He was an outdoors person, 100%.
He's been camping since he can remember, since he was a toddler.
My heart just sank.
I quite honestly just cannot make sense of that. I don't.
The Oldsmobile sat empty on I-25, wallet and phone inside, keys gone. Braden Fuksa, 22, had vanished. When someone disappears without a trace, the most critical clues are often hidden in the hours before they walked away. His destination was mountains. His car was found on plains he never wanted to see. Why did he stop there? To understand what happened. We need to go back to the days before Braden left Kansas. When a person disappears without a trace, the most critical information is hidden in their actions and words from the days before they vanished. Braden Fuksa was 22 years old in early July 2009. He'd just moved into his first apartment in Lawrence, Kansas, 20 miles from his parents' home in Olathe. A young man who'd been camping since he could walk and hunting since he was 5. Independence looked good on him. He still drove back to Olathe constantly, though, for leftovers and grilling sessions with his father. Todd Fuksa traded recipes with his son the way some fathers talked sports. The kitchen they shared had been Braden's anchor for 22 years. The smell of charcoal and marinades. The easy rhythm of a father and son who genuinely liked each other's company. "I want to look into the game warden system in Montana," Braden said one afternoon, flipping burgers on Todd's grill. "The mountains. The space to hunt and fish without anyone around." Todd glanced at him. "That's a long way from home, son." Braden shrugged. But the intensity behind it was unmistakable. Montana wasn't a casual idea. It was something close to obsession. His mother noticed it too. Starla Fuksa exchanged daily texts with Braden, their relationship built on 2 decades of trust that had never been tested. When he mentioned Montana, she heard the same fixation Todd did. A young man who'd never been west of Kansas, talking about mountains he'd never seen, like they were the answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. Keep that detail in mind. Beneath the routine visits and easy conversations, Braden was drowning. Bass Pro Shops had just cut his hours to 8 per week. 8. For a 22-year-old with his first apartment and first real taste of independence, that wasn't survival. It was collapse. He didn't tell his parents. Instead, he sent texts that sounded exactly like him. "Got enough side jobs to get by. Don't worry." The words came easily. Same voice he used to talk about fishing. Same casual confidence. When Starla asked directly, "You sure you're okay with money?" Braden's answer was practiced, smooth. "Yeah, Mum. I've got enough side work lined up." He'd been hunting since he was 5 years old. He knew how to track something invisible through empty country. No one thought to verify the side jobs. Why would they? Braden had always been responsible, always figured things out. The kind of young man who moved into his first apartment and still showed up at his parents' house because he wanted to, not because he needed to. Except now he did need to. And he was covering it with the same easy charm that had always worked. The lie sat between them in the texts, in the kitchen conversations, in every reassurance that everything was fine. Starla believed him because she'd never had a reason not to. Todd believed him because Braden had always been honest about the things that mattered. What Braden wanted more than anything was mountains he'd never been to, Montana specifically, with an intensity that bordered on salvation. He talked about it the way some people talk about escape, and he was about to run out of time to explain why. The night before he disappeared, Braden Fuksa spent his last hours with someone who could tell something was catastrophically wrong. Megan Loach had been dating Braden for only 2 months, meeting him at a Lawrence party in late May where everybody seemed to know him, and he made her laugh. The easy charm, the outdoor stories, the way he talked about Montana like it was a place he'd been dreaming about his whole life. All of it had pulled her in. But Tuesday evening, July 14th, the charm was gone. Braden arrived at her apartment for what should have been an ordinary night. They made dinner, tried to hang out normally, except nothing about him felt normal. He was worried, visibly upset. Not himself at all. "You okay?" Megan asked, watching him stare at nothing. "You seem really off tonight." "Yeah, just a lot going on." "You want to talk about it?" He shook his head, didn't elaborate. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was the kind of quiet that replaced conversation when someone couldn't say what was actually happening. She'd known him 2 months, long enough to recognize his laugh, not long enough to know what silence meant when it replaced it. The evening dragged on. Braden stayed, but the version of him sitting across from her wasn't the same person who charmed her at that May party. Whatever weight he was carrying, it was crushing him. And he wasn't going to let her help carry it. Wednesday morning, mid-morning, he got up and left without saying goodbye, completely unlike him. Megan heard a car start in the parking lot, walked to her window, watched him pull away. No hug, no see you later, no acknowledgement that the night before had been so strange. She texted immediately, not saying goodbye anymore. The reply came fast. 2 words. "Goodbye, Megan." Capital G, formal, final. Not bye or later or see ya the way a 22-year-old texts the person he's been dating for 2 months. Goodbye. Like an ending, not a see you soon. Does that sound like a man planning to come back? Megan stared at her phone. The text felt wrong, weighted with something she couldn't name. But what was she supposed to do? Call him back and demand an explanation for proper grammar? He'd said goodbye. She had to assume he meant it the casual way, not the permanent one. Except the formal precision of it, the capital G, the full word, instead of the shorthand that wasn't casual at all. It was the kind of goodbye someone sends when they know it's the last thing they'll ever say to you. And it was. At 2:30 that afternoon, Braden would send one final text to his mother. By evening, he would be 700 miles away, his Oldsmobile abandoned on a Wyoming interstate he'd never mentioned wanting to see. And "Goodbye, Megan" would stand as the last thing he ever said to anyone who thought they knew him. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a number on a computer screen. $800, transferred without explanation. Wednesday evening, July 15th. Todd and Starla returned from a trip. Starla had texted Braden earlier that afternoon around 2:30, the usual mothers-and check-in. Then they'd gone to a movie. When Todd sat down at the computer that evening and opened their bank account, the number stopped him cold. $800, transferred out, Braden's account. Double, maybe triple what he usually asked for, and he hadn't asked, just taken it. Todd called immediately. The phone rang, clicked to voicemail. "Hey, what's up? Saw you transferred some money. Were you in trouble? Do you have enough?" He hung up and looked at Starla. "He'll call back in the morning," she said. "Probably just short on rent again." "Yeah, 800 though. That's more than usual." But the usual applied to everything about Braden. He called back. He texted daily. He showed up when he said he would. The usual was reliable. The usual meant everything was fine. Thursday came and went without a word. This was not like him. Braden and Starla texted every day. Every day. The kind of open relationship where silence itself was a message. And the message Thursday was sending didn't make sense. She tried calling. Nothing. Texting. Everything okay? Call me when you get a chance. No response. Still nothing, she said to Todd that evening. That's weird. Right. Curious was turning into uneasy. Uneasy was turning into something harder to name. Friday. Saturday. Sunday morning. Still nothing. When does a son who texts his mother every day become a son who hasn't answered in 72 hours? Todd and Starla began the ritual that would define their week. Calling regularly every few hours, then every hour, driving by Braden's apartment in Lawrence, looking for his car in the lot, driving by Bass Pro Shops where he worked, scanning the parking spaces for the Oldsmobile they knew as well as their own vehicles. They didn't call the police. Not yet.
He was an outdoors person, 100%.
He's been camping since he can remember, since he was a toddler.
Thompson read through the report carefully. The details painted a picture his parents had never seen. The theft charge resulted from Braden stealing some cash from his employer, the report stated. He'd worked security at Bass Pro Shops, the job his parents thought was just cutting his hours. He had access to the registers at closing. He took over $1,000, got caught, confessed, returned nearly all of it. Arrested anyway. It was a felony-level theft, which means in Kansas it was over $1,000. Braden had spent one night in Johnson County Adult Detention Center. One night in a cell. Booked and fingerprinted and released the next morning. One night that his parents, the people he texted every day, the people he visited for leftovers and grilling sessions, knew nothing about. And then Thompson saw the date that made everything click into place. Preliminary hearing scheduled July 16th, the day after Braden disappeared. He wasn't just struggling financially. He wasn't just worried about money or stressed about independence. Braden Fuksa had committed a felony, been arrested, spent a night in jail, and hidden all of it from the people who thought they knew him best. And when his court date arrived, he wasn't there. He was already gone. Thompson picked up the phone. This was the call that would shatter everything Todd and Starla believed about their son. I need to tell you something we discovered about Braden's background, Thompson said when Todd answered. What do you mean? He was arrested a week before he disappeared. Felony theft from Bass Pro. He spent a night in jail. One night in jail. 1 week of silence. One lie that let him vanish before anyone understood why. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Thompson thought the call had dropped. He'd never been in trouble, ever, Starla said when she got on the line, her voice hollow. Not even a speeding ticket. We would never have suspected, Todd added. We've always had such an open relationship with our kids. But open only works when both sides are honest. And Braden had been carrying a felony arrest, a night in jail, and a looming court date for an entire week, without saying a word to the people who thought they knew everything about his life. It's like a Twilight Zone moment, Starla said. What is this I don't understand? She heard theft charge and court date in the same breath she was used to hearing leftovers and grilling. The son they thought they knew, reliable, honest, open, had dissolved into someone else entirely. Someone who could steal $1,000, lie about it for a week, and disappear the day before he was supposed to face the consequences. His court date was July 16th. The morning after, he vanished. Which meant Braden wasn't just running scared, he was running from the law. The silence that once seemed harmless had calcified into the lie that let him disappear completely. And according to his roommate, the night before he vanished, Braden told one final, calculated lie about where he was going. The roommate was Braden's best friend, the person who should have known something. But what Thompson learned was that even he'd been lied to. Braden's roommate was also his best friend from school, the person who should have noticed something wrong, but only saw the pattern in hindsight. Late rent. Growing fear after that night in jail. Thompson called him Monday. He was late with rent in June, the roommate explained. Then in July, late again, like a week late. Money troubles that made sense now. The theft, the arrest, the desperation.
My heart just sank.
After he spent that night in jail, he was pretty freaked out about it. Freaked. The word landed hard. Not worried, not stressed, freaked. The kind of fear that comes from spending a night in a cell knowing you're facing a felony charge. When did you last see him? Thompson asked. Wednesday. He said he was going to spend the night with his parents in Olathe. Did he say why? No, but that wasn't unusual. He stayed there a lot. Except this time, he never arrived. Or rather, he arrived, the neighbours confirmed that, but he didn't stay. He had court Thursday morning, Thompson said, connecting the dots the roommate couldn't see. He never showed up. The instinct to hide, first about money. Now about an arrest, had fully calcified into the lie that let him disappear cleanly. Thompson already had another piece from his conversation with Todd and Starla. The neighbours across the street from the Fuksa home saw Braden that Wednesday morning for about 15 minutes, waving hello and goodbye like any other visit. He waved to us, hollered hi, the neighbours had told them. Was there maybe 15 minutes, waved goodbye on his way out. Friendly. Normal. Unhurried. Thompson checked the timeline. 10:30. 10:40. Then his mother's final text with him was at 2:30 that afternoon. 4 hours between the cheerful wave to the neighbours and the last communication with his family. 4 hours during which Braden was already executing a plan the people who loved him couldn't see. After that, he didn't call or text anyone else. He was already gone. Gone with a handgun taken during those 15 ordinary minutes. Gone with $800 transferred without explanation. Gone toward a court date he had no intention of attending. Braden waved hello and goodbye to the neighbours, friendly, normal, unhurried, while executing a plan he'd already set in motion. Taking a gun no one would notice missing until Sunday. Telling his roommate he'd be at his parents' house. Texting his mother one final time at 2:30 that afternoon. And then vanishing. Does that sound like panic? Or does that sound like a plan? That 15-minute visit to his parents' house, cheerful waves to the neighbours. Gun taken from the closet was the last time anyone who knew Braden Fuksa saw him alive. By mid-afternoon, he'd sent his final text to Starla, and by evening he'd be 700 miles away, in a place none of them had ever heard him mention, a state where they were certain he'd never been and knew no one. Wyoming Highway Patrol would find his car on the side of Interstate 25, abandoned.
Why would he take his dad's handgun instead of his own?
The notification hit Detective Thompson's system late Monday. A delayed entry match on Braden Fuksa's license plate, run by Wyoming Highway Patrol 3 days earlier. Thompson opened the alert and read carefully. Vehicle check, Douglas, Wyoming area, July 16th, 10:44 a.m., Thursday morning. A trooper had found an abandoned vehicle on Interstate 25 near Douglas, Wyoming. Ran the plate, no hits. No missing person report existed. Yet Todd and Starla wouldn't file one until Sunday afternoon. So the trooper documented it and moved on. 3 days later, when the missing person report finally entered the system, the computer connected them. Delayed entry hit. They found it Thursday morning, Thompson said, staring at the screen. We didn't file the report until Sunday. He pulled up a map. Olathe, Kansas to Douglas, Wyoming. The distance stopped him cold. 700 miles. He drove all night, Wednesday afternoon. Final text to his mother at 2:30. Wednesday night. Through Kansas and Nebraska and into Wyoming. By Thursday morning, 10:44 a.m., his Oldsmobile was abandoned on the side of I-25 in a state he'd never mentioned to anyone. Braden didn't just run. He drove through the night, 700 miles to Wyoming, a state he'd never mentioned, showing a scope of flight that went far beyond panic. Thompson picked up the phone. We located Braden's vehicle, he told Todd. Douglas, Wyoming. The silence on the other end stretched long. Wyoming, Todd finally said. What? What is in Wyoming? He doesn't know anyone in Wyoming, Starla added when she got on the line. He's never been there. Douglas, Wyoming. Population 6,000. 700 miles from everything Braden had ever known. Their worst feeling realized he wasn't just missing locally, hiding out with friends in Lawrence or staying off-grid nearby. He'd fled across state lines, driven through the night to a place that made no sense to anyone who thought they knew him. 700 miles, Todd repeated, trying to process it. Why that direction? What's causing him to go there? It's just so out of character, Starla said. Then she stopped herself. Except, we keep learning he wasn't who we thought. The theft, the arrest, the night in jail, the lies about money, the calculated goodbye to Megan, the cheerful wave to neighbours while taking a gun. Every piece revealed someone they didn't recognize. And now Wyoming, a state so random, so disconnected from anything in Braden's life that it felt like he'd thrown a dart at a map. We're going, Todd said. We have to go get the car. We have to see where he was. Dumbfounded didn't begin to cover it. The more information that kept coming up, the more confused they got. What is in Wyoming? Why that direction? They couldn't answer. Neither could Thompson. Neither could anyone who'd ever known Braden Fuksa. The car had been sitting there since Thursday morning, 3.5 days, while his parents searched Lawrence and Olathe, while they discovered the gun missing, while they learned about the arrest and the court date he'd fled. All that time. The answer was 700 miles north, in a place that made no sense to anyone who knew him. They left Olathe before dawn Friday, driving toward a car their son had abandoned and a question that had no good answer. 13 hours. Kansas to Nebraska to Wyoming. Todd drove, Starla navigated. Neither of them said out loud what they were bracing to find when they arrived: a car, or something worse. You think he's there? Starla asked, somewhere past the Nebraska border. I don't know, Todd said. We have to see the car. They were very anxious, scared of what they'd discover. It was a very emotional trip. Every mile north felt like driving deeper into something they couldn't understand. Their son, the one who visited for leftovers, who grilled with his father, who texted his mother every day, had driven this exact route through the night with a stolen gun and a court date he was fleeing. 13 hours, Starla said, staring out the window. He drove through the night. The landscape changed as they crossed into Wyoming. From Cheyenne north toward Douglas, the population dropped to hardly any. Very small towns. Houses far and few between, hills, plains, gorgeous country stretching empty in every direction. But it wasn't mountains. It's beautiful, Todd said, taking in the rolling plains. But it's not what he talked about. He wanted the mountains, Starla said. This is plains. Why would he stop here? Braden had talked about Montana with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Mountains. Space to hunt and fish without anyone around. The game warden system he wanted to look into. This area they were heading toward didn't coincide with what they knew he wanted. It didn't make sense. I don't understand any of this, Todd said. Mile after mile, they searched the landscape for something, a sign, a reason, anything that would explain why their son chose this direction. Nothing. Just empty country and small towns, and the certainty that Braden had driven this same route 9 days earlier, fleeing something they were only beginning to understand. It was late at night by the time they reached Douglas. Population 6,000. A small town that shouldn't mean anything to their son. They found a motel, checked in, sat in the room staring at walls that held no answers. We're here, Starla said. We drove his route. Tomorrow we'll see the car, Todd said. See what's in it. What neither of them said out loud. What if he's still out there somewhere? What if they find him? What if they don't? The unspoken fears filled the silence between them. They'd driven 700 miles searching for their son in a landscape he'd never mentioned wanting to see. Tomorrow morning they'd go to the tow yard. Tomorrow they'd examine what Braden had locked and walked away from. Tomorrow they'd look for clues in what he'd taken and what he'd left behind. 13 hours they'd driven, retracing the route Braden took the night he disappeared. They were 700 miles from home, in a town their son had never mentioned, about to examine a car he'd abandoned on the side of Interstate 25. And in the morning, they'd discover the one detail that would tell them more than any explanation. The keys were exactly where Braden always kept them. The tow yard opened at 8 Saturday morning, and Todd and Starla Fuksa were the first ones through the gate. There it was, Braden's car, sitting in a dusty lot 700 miles from home, parked like any other vehicle, except its driver had vanished 9 days ago, and no one knew if he was alive or dead. They approached slowly, neither saying what they were looking for. Signs of struggle, blood, a note. Something that would explain why their son had driven through the night to this place. Starla opened the door. It's just sitting here, she said, like he parked it and walked away. Let's see what's inside. She scanned the interior. Breath held. No blood, no signs of anything. No violence, no forced entry. Just an empty car that looked like someone had parked it deliberately and left. Todd noticed something. The door had a keyless entry code. Braden always used that instead of keys. And Braden had a habit, one he'd maintained for years. He always stuck his keys under the floor mat. Always. That was where they lived when he wasn't driving. Todd reached down and lifted the mat. The keys were there. Exactly where Braden always kept them. He always kept his keys under the floor mat, Todd said. Always. He held them up. And the weight of that small detail hit him harder than any of the confusion of the past 9 days. They're here. The keys are here. Not lost. Not dropped in a struggle. Not taken by someone else. Placed deliberately under the floor mat where Braden always kept them, following a habit so ingrained it had become automatic. That tells me he locked his vehicle and walked away, Todd said. The keys under the floor mat proved something terrible. Braden wasn't taken. He wasn't in an accident. He locked his car and walked away from his entire life by choice. Before I show you what else Todd and Starla found in that car, comment A if you think Braden is still alive, or B if you think the gun tells a different story. Add one short reason. A quick note. Some details ahead are dramatized for emotional impact, though the core facts remain true. They went through the rest of the car systematically. The bag in the back seat looked disturbed, clothes sorted through, some taken, others left behind. His cell phone gone.
Braden was, quote, pretty freaked out about having spent a night in jail.
The car sat there all night. But Braden wouldn't have Thompson believed. He left Thursday morning, shortly before the trooper arrived. The question was where he'd gone from there. From where the vehicle was found, there's a truck stop on up the road, Thompson said, studying the map. Northbound I-25 south of Douglas, the abandoned car, and just ahead, up the interstate, a rest stop. Trucks, travelers, people heading north toward Montana. It was a very short walk to the rest stop, maybe half a mile, 10 minutes on foot. For a 22-year-old who'd been hunting since he was 5, who'd just driven 700 miles alone, who was carrying a handgun and everything he needed in a backpack that was nothing. With Braden's personality, he wouldn't have had a problem talking his way into a ride. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. Outgoing, easy to talk to. The kind of guy who made friends at parties, who charmed his ex-girlfriend and his new one, who waved to neighbors while stealing a gun. He could strike up a conversation in a heartbeat. And at a rest stop full of travelers heading north, someone would have given him a ride. It made perfect sense. Thompson laid out the timeline like a wound that wouldn't close. A trooper checked the vehicle at 10:44. Braden probably left around 9:93. Thursday morning, July 16th. The car sitting on the shoulder. Braden walking north toward the rest stop in the early morning light. Thumb out, looking for a ride to Billings. And the trooper arriving an hour later. We only missed having some contact with him by an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. 1 hour, 60 minutes. The length of a lunch break and the difference between finding someone and losing them forever. That's it. That's the whole window. When Thompson shared this with Todd and Starla, the silence stretched long enough that he thought the call had dropped. An hour earlier, Thompson said, and someone would have stopped for him. An hour earlier. And the trooper finds Braden at the rest stop, or walking toward it, or still by the car. An hour earlier. And there's a conversation, a welfare check, a call to his parents. An hour earlier. And this is a story about a kid who ran scared and got brought home. An hour, Starla finally said. Her voice sounded hollow, like something essential had been carved out and wouldn't grow back. That's all it was, Todd said. 1 hour. The closest anyone ever came to finding Braden Fuksa was 1 hour 60 minutes that separated a Wyoming trooper from a missing 22-year-old who might still have been saved. An hour is nothing. A cup of coffee, a wrong turn, a phone call that runs long. But it was everything. An hour earlier, and this story ends differently. The trooper finds Braden at the rest stop, or someone gives him a ride and reports it, or he's still walking and a passing driver stops to help. Instead, his absence was about to stretch from 2 weeks into 6 months, then 11, then beyond anything his parents could have prepared for. Thompson contacted Billings University Police. Montana City Police distributed posters along the Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana route, even into Canada. The search went wide as Braden's possible path, and came back empty. August 2009. The 1 hour near miss still fresh. Thompson worked methodically. Billings was where Braden told Reuben he was heading. The university. The game warden dream, Montana. So Thompson started there. Billings Police, Montana cities along I-90, Wyoming departments that covered the stretch between Douglas and the Montana border, Nebraska towns along the route south. Every police department that might have seen a young man matching Braden's description, hitchhiking or walking or trying to blend in. We're looking for a missing 22-year-old, Thompson told each department. Last confirmed sighting was in Wheatland, Wyoming, may have been heading north toward Billings. He sent Braden's description, the arrest photo, the details about the theft charge, the fled court date, the gun. Everything that might help someone recognize him if he passed through. Nothing came back. Todd and Starla joined the effort, posters with Braden's face, his details, a number to call. They distributed them along every mile of highway Braden might have traveled, Kansas to Nebraska to Wyoming to Montana. Rest stops, gas stations, truck stops, diners, places where someone passing through might stop, might see a poster, might remember a face. The posters went further, into Canada, along the northern border towns, because if Braden made it to Montana and kept going, Canada was right there. Wide open country where a person could disappear if they wanted to. Someone, somewhere, would recognize him. That was the hope. Weeks passed, August into September. September into October. From the Kansas apartment where Braden packed his things to the Canadian border where his poster hung in a truck stop window, 1,500 miles of highway. Hundreds of police departments, thousands of rest stops, gas stations, motels. One 22-year-old security guard. The math wasn't in their favor. Despite searching an area covering 4 states and extending into Canada thousands of square miles, hundreds of thousands of people who might have seen him, not a single confirmed sighting emerged. No one called to say they'd given him a ride. No one reported seeing him at a rest stop. No trucker remembered picking up a hitchhiker heading north. The posters hung in windows and on bulletin boards and in gas station bathrooms, and no one called. The search had reached its maximum scope. 4 states, Canada, the entire route Braden could have travelled. Every police department Thompson could reach, every town where his parents could hang a poster. And it produced nothing. By late October, the calls stopped coming in. The trail that had led from Emporia to Wyoming, from a theft warrant to an abandoned Oldsmobile, from a 1 hour near miss to a 4-state search, that trail went cold. Braden Fuksa had been missing for 3 months. He would be missing for 8 more before anyone saw him again. Or thought they did. The voicemail was 6 months old by the time it mattered. Detective Thompson had heard hundreds since July. People who thought they'd seen Braden at gas stations in Colorado, walking highways in Nebraska, sleeping in parks in Montana. Every call got logged. Most got filed. This one sat in his inbox for 3 days before he listened. The woman said her name was Linda Curl. She worked at a Salvation Army kitchen in Cheyenne, Wyoming. She'd served someone in early January who looked exactly like the boy on the poster, the missing person flyer that had made it all the way to her bulletin board. She was certain it was him. Not just the face, the way he'd taken the food. Thompson called her back. Linda Curl answered on the second ring, and her certainty didn't waver. January 8th, middle of the lunch rush. A young man, early 20s, light brown hair, very thin, very quiet. She'd asked if he wanted a meal, and he'd said yes. Then he'd asked for bread. She'd given him a roll, and he'd asked for more. She'd given him 3 whole loaves, the kind they served sliced for toast. And he'd put them in his backpack like they were the only thing he'd come for. That detail stopped Thompson. Bread. Who asks for 3 loaves of bread? She said he'd told her he had a long way back to Kansas. Kansas. Braden Fuksa was from Hays, Kansas. His car had been found 90 miles north. If he'd gone north and kept going, Cheyenne would be on that line. Thompson asked what the young man had been wearing. Linda wasn't sure. Maybe a dark jacket, maybe jeans. But she remembered his face, and she remembered the bread. When Thompson told Starla, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He loves bread." Loved, loves. The tense was impossible, but the detail was right. Braden would eat half a loaf before dinner even started. He'd take bread to school, bread on road trips, bread in his backpack when he went to visit Megan. Starla had teased him about it. Thompson asked if Braden had ever mentioned Cheyenne. Starla said no, but he'd talked about going north, about seeing Montana, about driving until the roads ran out. Cheyenne wasn't Montana, but it was on the way. For the first time since July, the Fuksa allowed...
I asked him where he was going. He said he was headed for the university in Billings.
Something had happened on that highway, or in the days after accident. Harm, chance encounter that went wrong. He couldn't call because he couldn't. No evidence was strong enough to close either door. "Maybe he just wants to start over," Todd said once. "Maybe he can't call us," Starla answered. "Maybe we'll never know which one it is." The investigation had slowed to the rhythm of cold cases, periodic reviews, annual check-ins with the National Missing Persons Database. A detective who kept the file open but had stopped expecting breakthroughs. Thompson still took their calls, still promised to follow any new leads.
We only missed having some contact with him by an hour or maybe an hour and 15 minutes.
But the leads had stopped coming. The tips had dried up. The people who'd thought they'd seen Braden at rest stops and diners and shelters, they'd moved on to other missing faces, other posters. How do you grieve someone who might not want to be found? Sometimes Todd and Starla drove past Braden's old apartment in Olathe, the place he'd lived before deciding to move to Fort Collins, before packing his Oldsmobile with everything he owned and heading north. They'd slow down as they approached. Look at the windows on the second floor, his windows, though someone else lived there now. They never said out loud what they were hoping to see. A light on that looked familiar, a silhouette that matched the way he stood, evidence that he'd come home and just hadn't told them yet. They never saw it. But they kept driving past. 11 months became a year, then more. The case file on Detective Thompson's desk grew thinner. Fewer leads, fewer calls, fewer reasons to believe the next tip would be different. But Todd and Starla Fuksa never stopped looking for their son. Years pass, and Todd and Starla Fuksa are still looking. The looking has never stopped. It's become part of who they are. Now parents waiting for a son who may never walk through the door. They scan crowds at grocery stores, at gas stations, anywhere a 20-something man might be. Still check their phones for messages that don't come. Still pause when someone mentions Wyoming or Montana, or a young man traveling alone. "Do you ever think about stopping?" someone asked Starla once. She didn't have to think about the answer. How do you stop looking for your son? You don't. That's the truth they've learned. Grief has rituals. Funerals, burials, anniversaries to mark. But uncertainty has no ritual, just the endless looking, the waiting for an answer that hasn't come in years. The questions remain exactly where they were the day Braden disappeared. What happened in that hour and 15 minutes between when he left the Oldsmobile on I-25 and when the Wyoming trooper found it empty? Did he walk away willingly, or did someone stop? Did he mean to disappear, or did circumstance decide for him? The car was locked, his wallet was inside, his phone, everything that said Braden Fuksa except Braden himself. Somewhere there's still a bag of leftovers he never came back for, a meal his friend Eleanor saved because he'd said he wanted it. Small details that became evidence when a person vanishes. The ordinary turning into the last known. What happens in an hour and 15 minutes that changes everything? No one knows. No one will ever know. The investigation is still open. Tips still come in occasionally. Someone who thinks they saw him in Colorado, in Oregon, in Canada. Thompson retired, but the case stayed active. New detectives review the file, make the calls, follow the threads that lead nowhere. The Salvation Army sighting in Cheyenne remains the most credible lead. Linda Curl. Certain about the bread, certain about Kansas, but certainty doesn't bring someone home. He wanted mountains, Starla said once, years later.
I was absolutely sure it was the same person that had been here because of his eyes and his smile.
He never made it to the mountains. That's the cruelest part. Braden told his mother he was driving to Montana to see mountains. He packed his Oldsmobile with everything he owned, left Kansas, headed north toward the landscapes he'd dreamed about. They found his car on the Wyoming plains flat, empty, nowhere he wanted to be. Miles from the mountains he'd been driving toward. Why did he stop there? Why did he leave the car on a stretch of highway that looked nothing like his destination? Not even he could have told them. Braden Fuksa wanted mountains, but disappeared on plains he never wanted to see. The place he was going and the place he vanished couldn't be further apart. That distance between intention and outcome, between what he sought and where he stopped, is where all the unanswered questions live. Braden Fuksa has been missing since July 16, 2009. The case remains open. His parents are still looking. Some stories don't end, they just stop being told. Braden Fuksa has been missing since July 16, 2009. His case remains open. His parents are still looking. This story stays with you because of what it doesn't give us answers. There's no resolution, no closure, no moment when everything makes sense. Just a young man who wanted to see mountains and never made it. And a family who has spent years living inside an unanswered question. That's the reality for thousands of families across the country. Missing persons cases that don't end with funerals or reunions, just silence. What happened in that hour and 15 minutes? Why did he stop on those plains? Was the Salvation Army sighting real? We may never know. But Braden Fuksa deserves to be remembered. Not as a mystery, but as a person. 22 years old, loved bread, dreamed of mountains. Had parents who have never stopped looking. If this story moved you, please take a moment to leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Subscribe to stay connected to stories like this. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, share it with them. These cases need witnesses. They need people who remember. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about a young man who disappeared 15 years ago and whose story still matters. This video is based on a real missing persons case. Some scenes and dialogue have been dramatized for storytelling purposes, but the core facts, the disappearance, the investigation, the family's ongoing search, are real. If you have any information about Braden Fuksa's disappearance, please contact local authorities. Our deepest respect goes to the Fuksa family.